Good morning. Sorry, Will. Thank you for coming. We are here today to announce the arrest of a Port St. Lucie police officer by the name of Myron Pratt, 30 years of age, for various sexual charges involving a victim of 16 years of age. On Saturday evening, the sheriff's office received a telephone call, or a 911 call, concerning a parent concerned about the activity of her 16-year-old daughter with a 30-year-old male identified as Pratt. Our investigation began there. We began gathering information, took statements from the victim as well as the mother, and continued our investigation with the seizure of the juvenile's telephone and a computer. And we began our investigation into the contents of the phone and the computer. That led us to different locations in the county where the two had been prior to the acts in question. We were able to verify the victim's story as to locations and times that they had been when the acts had occurred. That continued through the weekend and into yesterday as we put the pieces together of our investigation and the facts of the case. Yesterday afternoon, affidavits were presented to the state attorney's office, who authorized the arrest warrant for the charges that you all have before you. And last evening at approximately 8 p.m., Mr. Pratt was taken into custody at the Port St. Lucie Police Department, where he had been summoned to sign paperwork with regards to his leave. That's pretty much the case. Chief Bullock from Port St. Lucie Police Department would also like to make a statement. Chief?
Thank you, Chief. First, I'd like to start off by thanking the sheriff and the sheriff's department for balancing the respect for the integrity of the investigation and also providing me with the information I needed to do what needed to be done with Mr. Pratt as far as his employment with the police department. What I'd like to point out here is there is going to be a significant difference between the internal affairs investigation is going to proceed forward now with the police department following this criminal investigation, and the rules of procedure forbid me from commenting on the investigation, the internal affairs investigation, as it relates to his employment. So I'll direct you to the sheriff or the chief deputy for questions about the criminal investigation. I do want to say that this is unacceptable behavior for anyone, and it's incomprehensible for a police officer to engage in this type of behavior. And Mr. Pratt is on unpaid administrative leave pending the outcome of the internal investigation. And I sincerely hope that the behavior of this one individual does not reflect on the character or the moral values of the other 284 employees of the Port St. Lucie Police Department.
I can tell you all that these cases are never easy when we are called upon to investigate other law enforcement officers. But in this particular case, listen, we have in the sheriff's office 650 employees. I think the chief has 350 employees. And just the fact of life is sometimes, no matter how disturbing these acts are, they happen. And we had extreme cooperation from the Port St. Lucie Police Department during this investigation. And we made sure that we covered, our investigators made sure that we covered every base and every angle of this investigation because it involved a law enforcement person and because of the serious nature of this case and the victim's family. So that being said, we're available to answer any questions.
Did you get a statement from Pratt?
No, he has a lawyer and it would not answer questions.
Was there any evidence that they had sex while he was on duty?
No. The acts occurred while he was off duty.
Do we know how they know each other?
They met. He is a adjunct professor at Indian River State College. She is duly enrolled and was a student in his class. The relationship began first as a teacher-student relationship, and while she was working on a project, she had questions of her instructor. That ended up where the relationship kind of grew from there. It became more social, and then, of course, culminated with the sex acts that are part of this investigation.
Is there any way he didn't know how old she was?
Not as far as we're concerned. He knew how old she was.
So when we're talking about dual enrollment, this student is in high school as well?
Yes.
What, do we know what year?
10th grade.
10th?
10th grade.
Do you know when Mr. Pratt was hired by the PSLPD, or?
I believe he's been employed since 2010.
Yeah, roughly a year and 3 months is what I'm being told. So he just recently got off probation.
Oh,
And if you
okay.
add in the FTO program, it'd be about a year and 3 months, I believe.
He was hired about a year and 3 months,
Yeah,
15 months ago.
yeah, he's been in law enforcement since 2000.
Okay, I'm sorry.
So he came from another law enforcement agency?
Yes, he was a Vero Beach police officer prior to employment with PSL.
He also knows he has children.
Yes.
What's going on with that family relationship? Has there been any ruling by DCF?
No, I mean, that is not part of our investigation, his activities. I mean, there's a mom and children involved, and that's just the way that is with them.
So he's married and has?
Yes.
2 kids?
Not sure on the number of children.
Was there any allegations that
Yeah.
he was doing anything inappropriate with the kids?
No.
What was it just Officer Pratt? Did he have a rank? What was his,
Police officer.
I know you gave us these documents, I haven't read them all yet, but did any of this inappropriate sexual activity happen at IRSC campus?
No.
Okay.
do we know how long he'd been teaching at IRSC?
I do not have that information.
Do we know how many times it's alleged he committed the act?
We believe we have 2 acts, and that's what our investigation is based on.
So he had sex twice with the 16-year-old
Yes.
victim, basically?
Yes.
Okay.
I will tell you, I will also say that there is a possibility that there may be other victims out there, and we would very much like to hear from any other females that might have had inappropriate contact with Mr. Pratt, and we would like you to contact the sheriff's office if that is in fact true.
There were pictures?
Pictures,
There were pictures exchanged?
yes, there were pictures exchanged.
Of what?
Sex parts solicited by Mr. Pratt from the female.
So the 16-year-old sexted him.
Yes.
Why do we believe there could be more victims?
Just the nature of our investigation and his involvement with some of the students, and we just have that concern, and that's why we're asking if there is anything to that, we'd like to be notified.
He was in uniform?
He was not in uniform, no.
He was wearing police pants?
Well, he was wearing what essentially is blue uniform pants, but yes, but no other uniform parts.
What were the circumstances behind his arrest? Did he come in here, or did you guys get him at his house?
He had been summoned to the Port St. Lucie Police Department by Internal Affairs to sign paperwork for their administrative part of the case, and investigators from the sheriff's office were there when he arrived and took him into custody there.
They had sex at a church?
Not at a church, in property that's actually adjacent to the church property.
So this took place in his car or her?
Her car,
2 times that we know of.
yes.
Is there in any way, has he in any way denied this or tried to say that, she's exaggerating?
He would not answer any of our questions.
He gave her money afterwards?
He bought gasoline for her car after one of the events, yes.
But it wasn't understood that it was money for sex.
No.
I know you couldn't, Chief Bullock couldn't comment so much on the internal affairs investigation, but, I mean, I'm assuming that he'd be fired. It's pretty heavy stuff.
Absolutely, the end game of being arrested for a felony by a police officer or 10 felonies for a police officer would be no longer being a police officer as far as his employment's concerned. But we do have to, we have to give him his due process and give him all of the rights that are afforded to him by Florida state statute, as far as his police officer's Bill of Rights. So that process will begin as soon as the criminal investigation is completed.
And so around Halloween is when this relationship began, so we're looking at about a month's time?
Yes.
Okay.
And she broke up with him.
Yeah.
How
Well,
did that happen?
It's
I mean, what
just,
did it say?
yeah, I mean, they had a discussion about the dangers of what was going on and thought it was best to break off the relationship, and that's kind of where it ended, but our investigation began because that's when the mother discovered the text messages that concerned her enough to call us.
So what's the message we should give parents? Because if the mother doesn't discover these text messages, we might not have gotten to this point, correct?
John, we've in different cases, we've stood up here and talked about the safety of our children and texting and the things that are available to young people today, whether it's computers, smartphones, that type of stuff. Parents have to pay attention to, what their children are doing and what's going on, and they need to have access to that equipment so that they can check and see, what their children are doing. I know that that's difficult today, with so many different, between Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all these types of things. But the fact of the matter is, had this mother not become suspicious and concerned enough to get the phone and begin looking at it, this probably would have gone unnoticed. And these are difficult times for young people today because there's so many distractions out there and so many opportunities for them to engage in this texting and sexting and things like that parents really have to stay on top of this and pay attention to what's going on.
What can you tell us in terms of what you talked to the teen at this point. Did she give any indication that he was taking advantage, that she wanted this to end and he kept at it?
I don't think it comes across like that, John. I think, when you read through it, you'll see that I think he clearly led her down this path, from the instructor-student relationship that it began at to where it ended. I think he did lead her down that path, but there doesn't appear to be any pressure on her when the conversation took place about, we shouldn't be doing this, we need to break this off. But clearly, his intentions, the way that the relationship developed, his intentions were to get to where it got. And that's why we're here now.
Chief, did you have any indication, any problems with him? What's his record, personnel file?
No, he's had no formal discipline with the department. We have had a couple minor complaints performance-wise, and we did have one complaint that he may have pursued a female too much, but that was retracted, and that investigation ended when she said it didn't happen. The complaint came from her husband. So, no indication of anything to this magnitude.
How old was she?
She was an adult. I don't remember her exact age.
This mentions that the victim, I guess, that she started to really trust and look up to Pratt due to his past. Any idea what's up with that, or?
Well, what we've been able to gather is that, he's local. He grew up here in St. Lucie County, graduated from Port St. Lucie High School. went in the Navy, did a lot of things, you know, life-wise that I think a 16-year-old could look up to, and now not only is he her instructor, but he's a police officer and things like that. And I think that, you know, conversations that they had led her to believe that she could trust him to the point that this relationship developed the path that it took. Anything else?
Obviously, Chief, you know, you've talked about how this doesn't reflect the department as a whole. Has there been any feedback to you from other officers on this case? I mean, what is the overwhelming?
Well, right now, I mean, the arrest was last night, and the majority of the employees at the police department were not privy to the investigation. I'll talk about my initial reaction was just shock, disbelief. And then obviously as the evidence becomes more and more evident, or becomes more and more clear, the shock wears off, and then, you know, it's just, you know, it's unbelievable. But I did go to the midnight shift briefing last night following the arrest and talk to the shift that he worked, midnight shift, and they were no comments. Just, you know, I mean, I'd say right now I'm embarrassed, you know, but this is just, you know, incomprehensible. That's all I can say.
Well, there's a lot of people that talk about the you know, the shield of blue. That never came into this investigation.
No, I don't think you're going to see any rallying behind Mr. Pratt's behavior by any police officers anywhere.
How long had it been since any of your officers had gotten in this kind of trouble?
I don't ever recall this kind of trouble for a police officer. Is that all your questions?
Anything else? All right, thank you very much for coming out. We appreciate it.